Imagine this. On a hot July morning, right in the middle of Main Street, a man is shot and killed in his pickup truck. The truck is riddled with bullets, sitting there for everyone to see. And there were witnesses, dozens of them. Maybe as many as 50 people saw it happen. But when the sheriff arrived and started asking questions, he hit a brick wall. A wall of absolute silence. Not a single witness could or would say who pulled the trigger. This is the shocking, true story of Skidmore, Missouri, and the town that got away with murder. To really get what happened that day, you have to understand the man at the center of it all. Ken Rex McElroy. Born in 1934, McElroy was the classic town bully, but even that doesn't really cover it. For over 20 years, he was less a man and more of a menace, holding the small farming community of Skidmore in a constant grip of fear. McElroy was a career criminal, suspected of everything from stealing livestock to arson. He was indicted 21 times, and 21 times he pretty much walked free. His secret: it wasn't genius. It was pure, brute force intimidation. Witnesses would suddenly forget what they saw. Jurors would get followed home. He'd park his truck outside the houses of people who crossed him, just sitting there for hours, a silent threat that was louder than words. His lawyer, Richard Gene McFadden, was a master at navigating the legal system, and McElroy often bragged that he couldn't be touched. For the folks in Skidmore, it felt like the law was powerless, like they'd been completely abandoned. But this wasn't just about theft and threats. It was personal and deeply violent. McElroy had a disturbing history with young girls, marrying his last wife, Trena McLeod, when she was just a teenager, to dodge statutory rape charges after she got pregnant. When she once tried to escape with their baby, he hunted her down, burned her parents' house to the ground, and shot their dog. And it wasn't an isolated incident. In 1976, a farmer named Romaine Henry told McElroy to stop firing guns on his property. For that, McElroy shot him in the stomach. Henry lived, but at the trial, McElroy produced a couple of witnesses who gave him an alibi, and he was found not guilty. It was a pattern the town knew all too well. McElroy does something brazen and violent, terrorizes anyone who might speak up, and walks away without a scratch. One writer called him a man who raped, robbed, and burned almost at will. The people of Skidmore were living in a state of constant, low-grade terror, just waiting for him to strike again. So what's the final straw? What pushes an entire town over the edge? For Skidmore, it started with something almost laughably small: a piece of candy. One of McElroy's daughters was accused of shoplifting from the local grocery store, owned by a 70-year-old man named Ernest Bo Bowenkamp and his wife, Lois. This minor spat was all the excuse McElroy needed. He started a campaign of harassment against the elderly couple, parking his truck outside their home for hours, night after night, sometimes firing his shotgun into the air just to terrorize them. The psychological warfare finally boiled over on the evening of July 8, 1980. Bowenkamp was on the loading dock behind his store when McElroy drove up, shotgun in hand. After a short confrontation, McElroy shot the 70-year-old grocer in the neck. Against all odds, Bo Bowenkamp survived. McElroy was arrested, and for the first time, it looked like justice might actually happen. He was charged with assault, and, to the town's absolute astonishment, he was convicted. But that relief, it didn't last long. A judge sentenced him to only 2 years, and, while his appeal was pending, let him out on bond. Ken Rex McElroy was back on the streets of Skidmore. Getting convicted didn't humble him, it made him even angrier. Right after being released, he walked into the DNG Tavern, the local bar, carrying an M1 Garand rifle with a bayonet attached. He started making loud public threats about what he was going to do to Bo Bowenkamp. He was brazenly violating his bond, and he didn't care who knew it. The people of Skidmore did everything right. They trusted the courts, they testified, and the system had failed spectacularly. It hadn't just failed to protect them, it had unleashed a wounded, furious monster into their lives. The tension in Skidmore was a powder keg, and Ken Rex McElroy had just lit the fuse. This case is a tough one. It really makes you think about what happens when people feel like the law has left them behind. It's a complicated and messy human story. If you're fascinated by these gray areas of justice, think about subscribing to the channel. We look into cases like this every week, not just to tell a good story, but to try and understand the powerful forces that drive ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So we come to the morning of July 10th, 1981. It's hot, and the town is on a knife's edge. Dozens of worried townspeople, mostly men, were gathered at the Legion Hall with the county sheriff, trying to figure out what they could legally do to protect themselves. The sheriff suggested a neighborhood watch, which tells you just how bad things had gotten. Right as that meeting was happening, word spread like wildfire through the tiny town. Ken Rex McElroy and his wife Trenna had just pulled up to the D&G Tavern, right down the street. The meeting at the Legion Hall dissolved. Almost as one, the crowd of men streamed out of the hall and headed down the street to the tavern. The bar filled up. McElroy had a couple of drinks, bought a six-pack to go, and walked back out to his Chevy Silverado pickup, with Trenna in the passenger seat. He sat down and lit a cigarette. What happened next was swift, brutal, and decisive. As a crowd estimated between 30 and 60 people looked on, gunfire erupted, blowing out the windows of McElroy's truck. He was hit by bullets from at least 2 different guns. Ken Rex McElroy, the man who had terrorized Skidmore for decades, was dead in an instant, slumped over the steering wheel. His foot fell on the accelerator, making the engine roar for several minutes before someone finally reached in and shut it off. Amidst the chaos, his wife Trenna was screaming, but as the engine noise died, it was replaced by a different sound. Absolute silence. When Nodaway County Sheriff Danny Estes showed up, the scene was just ... surreal. A man had been murdered in broad daylight on Main Street, surrounded by dozens of witnesses. Yet, the answer was always the same. I didn't see anything. I was looking the other way. When the shooting started, I ducked. Not a single person would identify a shooter. Think about that. No one even called an ambulance. A wall of silence had gone up around Skidmore, and it was impenetrable. The investigation was doomed from the start. The sheriff, state investigators, and even the FBI couldn't crack the town's code of silence. 3 different grand juries were called, but no indictments were ever issued. Trenna McElroy did name a local man she said was one of the shooters, but with no one to back her up, the prosecutor couldn't press charges. To this day, the murder of Ken Rex McElroy remains officially unsolved. The story of Skidmore blew up. It became a national sensation, a modern-day folktale about vigilante justice. But for the town itself, the legacy is a lot more complicated. That day cast a long, dark shadow over the community, dividing people and bringing a kind of fame the quiet farming town never wanted. In the years that followed, Skidmore seemed to shrink. The population got smaller, and a sense of unease never quite left. Was this a story of triumphant justice, or a collective moral failure? The people who were there on that July morning took that secret to their graves. They acted together, as one. A town pushed past its breaking point that made a single, silent choice. The story forces you to ask some really uncomfortable questions. What is justice? What happens when the system that's supposed to protect you ... doesn't? The town of Skidmore gave its silent answer on July 10th, 1981, and it's a secret they've kept ever since.